I think the main point to note is most of the service providers like Euroclear actually did pretty well during the crisis. Major problem by any of these service providers, and I think when we look at the evolution of the market during the crisis, we see that there were tremendous activity. They were one of the main provider of liquidity, Lehman defaulting, and actually when we look at the activity and the efficiency of the market over the crisis period, they're pretty high. So if we look at Euroclear from a Euroclear perspective, Lehman was probably one of the biggest or one of the main users of our system during the crisis or before the crisis, and actually the settlement efficiency in Euroclear didn't change dramatically following the default of Lehman. Most of our clients were still able to borrow cash from us to still benefit from our credit lines, had been able to borrow securities whenever they were supposed to receive securities from Lehman, couldn't receive the securities, were able to borrow that and still meet their own delivery obligation. So I think overall, the system works pretty well. Now, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't change things, and I think it's an ongoing process. So we learn a few things out of the crisis. We certainly learned that communication and transparency was a very important element for all our clients. So we now spend much more time explaining what we are doing and what will be the situation we are processing. And the type of issue we may have in crisis situation. I think liquidity has been a big question for all providers, actually for all banks, but including for providers like Euroclear. So we have arrangement in place, and and those arrangements were actually there before the crisis. But now what we do, we are much more transparent about those arrangements that we have, just to make sure that the clients know what we can do and where our limits potentially, if we have any. It's also worth noting that we have started a lot of discussion with central banks as well to see how they can help us potentially in case of, or how we can support the business of their local banks in case of contingency or crisis like we had with the Lehman case. So it's an ongoing process. I think really the good things now is we have seen a lot of changes in the regulation, or there are still a lot of changes in regulation that are coming in. Well, in the US, in Europe, and obviously there will be more regulation as well at one point coming in Asia. And we see that many of the things that we were doing in the past actually were ahead of the new regulation. So like refusing to expand unsecured credit exposure. So credit with us is always on a secured manner. So those kind of things are now getting into the good practices and the best practices that the market is pushing us to go towards. So I think most of the things that we have seen in the crisis are actually moving to the right direction compared to where we are. So from a pure Asian perspective, I think well, Asia is, as far as we are concerned, is another part of the world where we are active. So what we have seen over the years, we are moving much more into a real-time process as well in Asia. We bought a lot of operations. So operations in Asia started for Euroclear in 2008. So that enables us to better support the Asian markets. So we are faster to answer to demands. We can answer demands during the time zone of the Asian markets. So really all of the activity we had in the past that were directed out of Europe are now being based in Asia as well. So we have product management, which enable us to adapt our services to the needs of the clients. And that's the clients, but that's also the infrastructure around Asia, the stock exchanges, the CCPs. We are discussing with them, making sure that we have the right service for their needs. We have network management. So again, we can adapt our services much faster than we used to do in the past. So I think we see a growing appetite from Asian clients actually to start dealing domestically. And that basically means we need to increase our service into the domestic market. So when I look at the growth of the market in Asia, well, in '95, which is 15 years ago, actually, there were absolutely no domestic market. I think the total domestic debt, excluding Japan, was something like 125 billion. Today, we are above 5.3 trillion of euros equivalent asset in Asia. So clearly, there's increased demand. I think part of that is driven by the fact that there are some concern about the European or US economy. So we see a growing appetite from investor in Asia to invest in Asia. And obviously that creates new demands a new service level requirement from infrastructure like Euroclear. So it's really an ongoing process. So I wouldn't say it's really driven by the Lehman crisis. I wouldn't say it's driven by the crisis. I think it's mainly driven by the growth of Asia. It's certainly the biggest growth in Asia that we see in Europe and in Europe.